Welcome to the Chess Angle. This is not your typical chess podcast. If you're an amateur or club-level player, the Chess Angle is for you. Our content is aimed at busy adults who are serious about the game but have limited study time. Featured guests include both amateur and titled players alike. And now, here's your host, Director of the Long Island Chess Club, Neil Bellon.
Welcome, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. And I want to start out by saying Happy Mother's Day. This episode is being released on Mother's Day here in the U.S. So happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. This is your day. And a quick story about something that happened at the club, the Long Island Chess Club. So a few weeks back, I couldn't make it. I had a family commitment. So Tim Mirabile, who was on the podcast last week, he had subbed for me. And when I went back the following week, I heard an interesting story from a friend of mine about his game. And this is the nice thing about playing in person at the club as opposed to online. As far as the stories and the camaraderie and just the social aspect, you just don't get that online. Maybe at one time you would, like through the chat or something. But sadly, when I play online now, I have to turn off the chat and the messaging. When I had the chat on, of course, people would make very nasty comments if they lost a game or something like that. And then I turned the chat off, but then they would carry that into the messaging. And I would get like, a nasty message or something. Really, really kind of sad that I have to turn off the messaging and the chat. But I guess that's how it is now. So anyway, I digress. So a friend of the club was telling me that he was in a situation, he was playing a low-rated player. He's about 1,800 plus. His opponent was 1,400 plus. And what he did, and you really can't do this in a game 90 with those club-level time controls, because game 90 is a lot of time, but at the same time, it does go kind of quickly. He took 25 minutes on one move. And I know that he knows better. It's a mistake that we all sometimes make, but you can't be taking 25 minutes on one move in a game 90 unless it's going to lead to mate or such an overwhelmingly winning position that you don't need a lot of time to win it. But that wasn't the case here. And we do this a lot. We see a tactic or something, or we see what we think is a winning plan, but it takes us so long to find it. And then once we do, we're then in time pressure and we don't have enough time to win it. So anyway, he takes 25 minutes on one move, gets into some time pressure, and as a result, he blunders an exchange. But something interesting happened. The lower-rated player who was up the exchange now, he took a common attitude that is incorrect, but a lot of people do this when they're up material. So what happened was he was so pumped up that he was up material against his higher-rated opponent that he almost like shut down. Like you go into this mode where you're like, I don't want to blow it. I'm up material. My opponent's high rated. I don't want to blow it. I don't want to blow the win, because that's what you're thinking. Like, don't screw this up. Don't screw this up, right? We all go through that. He ended up playing too passively. He thought he could just sort of shuffle and make these nothing moves and that the position would win itself, but it doesn't work that way. Now, yes, some players, when they lose material, they'll get so despondent that they fall apart. But if you're playing a strong player, if you're playing someone like 1,800 plus, I mean, even maybe lower rated than that, but if you're playing a good, competent tournament player, they're not just going to fold up their tent and roll over just because they're down material and have a losing position. He fought back. My friend, the higher rated player, fought back, and he ended up winning the game. What happened was, in the end game, he ended up having a bishop and two pawns for the rook, and he was able to get a passed pawn out of it. But this all started because the lower-rated player who had more material, he had this material advantage, he was just too cautious and played planless chess. So the rule is, the quote-unquote rule is, if you're up material, sometimes it's better to play as if you're not up material, and then it'll take care of itself. The other takeaway from that is the exchange is not as huge an advantage as people think. Yes, that's a significant material difference. The rook is 5 points and a bishop or a knight is 3 points. But if the queens are still on the board, and if the minor pieces, if the person who lost the exchange still has active minor pieces, he's still in the game. I mean, the exchange can be tough. And if the person up the rook, if that rook really isn't doing anything valuable, if it's not really controlling a file or threatening material, it's not necessarily decisive. Like, the exchange is tough. And if you end up in an endgame, which they did here, the exchange is not always going to be decisive. The point of the story, the sort of moral of the story, is that just because you're up material, don't assume it's going to win itself, and don't think that you can go into this sort of shutdown mode where you play passively. And it's very easy to take the idea of, I'm up material, I don't want to mess this up, You can take that too far. And that's what happened here. So just an interesting anecdote that I heard from the club when I wasn't there that one week. So that being said, let's jump into our listener mailbag.
You've got mail.
A reminder, everyone is welcome to email me if you have a question or a comment or a topic suggestion, really anything that you want to say. I'd love to hear from you. Maybe you want to just put your 2 cents in. Maybe you disagree with something I've said. Maybe you thought that I missed something when I was speaking about a certain topic. Whatever it is, please chime in. info@thechessangle.com. Once again, info@thechessangle.com. That is the email. And you can also visit our website and use the contact link there. There's also a voicemail option on the website. If you click that microphone icon on the lower right, you can leave a voice message and I can play it on the show. We had a few of those already. That's pretty cool. But however you want to do it, definitely chime in with your thoughts or your comments. Our first message this week is from Connor. He says, "Hi, Neil. Wondering if you think it's worth it for amateur players to memorize games. Some examples might be classics like the opera game or memorizing games played by masters in your chosen openings. Is there any merit to learning these by memory, perhaps through spaced repetition, or should amateurs spend time elsewhere? Thank you. Keep up the good work. Your friend from Canada, Connor." Well, shout out to you, Connor, and our friends up north. Connor has written into the show a number of times. We appreciate it. Let's kind of go through what you said. So you said classic games like the opera game. What that is, that was a game played by Paul Morphy at an opera house in Paris in like the 1850s. Here's the thing. I have an interesting take on this. Some people are going to disagree. As far as improvement, and I'm biased towards my own improvement, and as far as how I treated these sort of memorized games, I think it's overblown as far as improvement because there's usually little transference to ones over the board games. And those master games tend to be difficult to understand and have a lot of nuance to them. I mean, I've heard more than one title player. It might have been even Hikaru who said this. Don't misquote me on that. I might be wrong, but I've heard players much stronger than myself say that just playing through master games from beginning to end can be a waste of time as far as improvement. Now, it hasn't helped me that much in my development. I'm reminded, just as an example, I had watched a YouTube video. It was a titled player giving a lesson. They videotaped the lesson, and he was reviewing a classic game with an amateur or an improver, whatever you want to call them. And it was obvious the amateur was sort of yesing the teacher, but was not really internalizing the material. And they may always say, how do you know that? How do you know what he's thinking? That was just the vibe I got. That was just my interpretation, not just from someone being a player, but as someone who was a teacher himself. I just kind of had the feeling that the amateur player was kind of like saying, okay, yeah, I see it, but they really don't. And what I'm thinking is for him and for most of us, there's no way the information from that master game is going to transfer into an actual tournament game. That may seem a little too negative, but an example I've used before, there was a game that I remember looking at. I think it was Petrosian. It was a London system where he sacrifices a queen for 3 minor pieces, and he ends up winning the game. And you can look at the game and you can memorize the moves and see how he used the minor pieces. But I'm thinking in an actual tournament setting, it's at night, you're tired, the clock is ticking. There's no way you would be able to see a position like that through the end without making a mistake. Strictly from a chess improvement point of view, I don't know if memorizing the games is really going to help. I think looking at specific positions and themes will certainly help. But that being said, this is the most important thing I can say. Looking at those games is fun. It is a lot of fun. And if you enjoy it, do it. Not everything you do has to be like strictly 100% chess improvement based. If you enjoy looking at those master games and memorizing them, absolutely do it if it's fun. I mean, let's not lose sight of why we do this. Of course, we all want to improve our rating, and a lot of us are concerned about that. That's true. But we do want the process to be fun as well. And if you enjoy it, do it. And who knows, maybe it will help you. But for me personally, studying master games or memorizing master games really hasn't helped because it doesn't transfer to my own over-the-board games. Now, that's just me. If anyone has a different opinion, if you disagree, if it has helped you, I'd love to hear from you. But that's just my own personal take on it, Connor, and we appreciate you writing in. Thank you. Our next email is from Stacy, and he says, just wanted to tell you that as an adult improver, I'm really enjoying the podcast. I started playing only about a year ago, and I've been trying to take it very seriously. I've taken many of your suggestions regarding study plans, but I've also hired an online coach, and that has been a huge help. I don't know if you've had an online coach on your podcast as a guest to talk about the advantages of that type of instruction, but it might be a good suggestion for an episode. Best of luck. Well, thanks, Stacy, for the message and the kind words. I appreciate it. I have had a number of guests who do teach online, and most chess coaches do teach that way now. They do teach online, either exclusively or in addition to their in-person teaching. That's the norm now, online lessons, that is, since the pandemic, because Zoom and other online video platforms are now mainstream. In fact, many teachers will only teach online now, including myself. I do want to kind of get back into teaching myself. I kind of want to pick up a few private students. I used to do that for a number of years a while ago. And if I start that up again, I actually would only do it online just because of my schedule and the way my life is structured at this point. And of course, online teaching has many advantages for both the teacher and the student. It's extremely convenient. There's no travel. The scheduling is more flexible. Because you're both on the computer, you can easily share games and PGN files and like pull things up. And rather than have to set and reset a physical board with pieces, everything's there in real time since you're both on the computer at the same time. So that's a huge advantage. And for scheduling, many people, if their home life is kind of busy, they can maybe sneak in an hour at a different location or at work or something like that. And it looks like you've hooked up with a good coach because you said that it's helped you. But good luck with your lessons, Stacy, and your chess journey, and we appreciate you writing in. Thank you. We're now going to take a short break, and we'll be back to continue our listener mailbag in just a moment. Our final message this week is from Stefane on our Buy Me a Coffee page. As a reminder, if you're interested in supporting the show, there is always a link in the show notes for our Buy Me a Coffee page. What you can do is buy me a virtual coffee as a way of saying thank you. And everything I do get from that, all the proceeds, do go right back into the show to help cover my overhead. So when we say support the show, you literally are doing that. So if you're interested, again, the links are in the show notes. And this is what Stefane says. He says, "Hi, Neil. I really enjoy the Chess Angle podcast. Thank you for putting such thought and work into it. As a 73-born, reinvigorated chess amateur, it's great to hear about chess improvement experiences and listen in on wide-ranging topics and thoughtfully crafted opinions. I wonder if you could consider my following questions, especially if you think it may be relevant to others. My 7-year-old is starting to surpass my abilities, especially when we play puzzle battles on chess.com, which makes us both very happy and me very proud. To continue to support his love of chess, I've signed him up to a local rated junior tournament sponsored by Chessmates here in Ottawa, Ontario, his first event ever. But neither of us have any OTB or chess club experience. I'm wondering what to expect and how best to prepare for things like logging chess moves in algebraic notation, should we bring a logbook, and whether chess clubs use physical clocks or if app clocks are allowed. Are FIDE-approved clocks required in junior or even adult events? And if so, do you have any strong opinions on clocks for casual OTB versus more serious OTB play? Of course, I'll write to the local club and ask them what they require, but I'd love to get your take on these and related or tangential topics. I'm thinking this is at least a 3 coffee question. Thanks and be well. Hear you soon. Well, Stefan, first of all, thank you for the very kind words. I'm glad you're enjoying the podcast, and thank you for the 3 coffees. I really appreciate the support. Very, very kind of you. Now, as a parent myself, that's great to hear that your 7-year-old is surpassing your abilities. We always love that as parents, so that's awesome that he's doing well. A couple of things to answer your question. If you contact the club, and they might even have this posted on their website, most of the information should be there as far as the basic requirements. And what you're going to see also is once you actually show up there, it'll become pretty clear what's going on and what they expect. Like once you play one round, you'll kind of get the hang of it. But let me try to take some of your specific questions. Now, as far as writing the moves down, if he's done that before or if he's used to that like online, like E4, E5, or whatever it is, hopefully that won't be too much of a problem. Now, you say, should we bring a logbook? That's up to you. Most chess clubs provide score sheets, and they probably do. But the good thing about a logbook is that you have your own record of the games rather than individual sheets, which can get lost. You could use the logbook. It's really up to you. As far as physical clocks, usually that's what you have to do. Now, I'm a US chess guy, so as far as what they do in Canada and FIDE, I'm not sure. I would imagine that you can't use like an app on your phone. I would imagine you have to use a dedicated physical chess clock, but they'll let you know that. And as far as the type of clock you want to get, I don't want to get into specific brands, but you want to make sure that it's easy to edit, that it has the delay function on it or the increment depending on what they use, and that it has different modes. So again, that you can edit. If you can store time controls, that would be good, because when you play at a club or a tournament, they usually have a standard time control. So if you could save that as a setting and you could just click whatever, like setting number 2, and it's there, that always helps. Most clocks have that feature. What I find with kids who get into tournaments, once they actually get there and start playing, they kind of get the hang of it pretty quickly, because I've had parents call me for our club as well with similar questions. And once they show up and they play in the tournament, they acclimate pretty well. But most chess clubs do have a website where they kind of explain the expectations and what the rules are. And of course, if there are any exceptions to the rules, those generally have to be posted. But most important, I'm glad that your 7-year-old is doing well, enjoying the game. And I wish you both lots of luck in your chess career. Thanks again for your email and for the coffee, Stefan. I really appreciate it. So now let's get to our main content. This is a game analysis episode. What I do for this, for those of you who are not familiar, I discuss a game that I played at the club thematically. We don't go move by move. It's not like a blindfold chess thing, but I discuss the main themes and takeaways and lessons from the game, what I learned, what I did well, what I should have done better, and hopefully we can all learn from it. But what I always do is put a PGN of the game in the show notes. So if you want to copy and paste it into an engine to look at it, you're more than welcome to do that. Some people like to do that at the end. Some people actually like to do that while they're listening to the episode. You certainly don't have to, but I do like to include the PGN just for thoroughness. So for this game, I had the black pieces. My opponent was rated like 1800 and change. And I want to go through a couple of things, and I'm just going to kind of jump around a little bit here. Always be aware of fianchettoed bishop tactics, especially if your fianchettoed bishop is undefended. All right, because what happens is when you move that G pawn or that B pawn, before you complete the fianchetto, that diagonal can be very vulnerable, because remember, your rook is in the corner undefended. And even when you do complete the fianchetto, that bishop is undefended. And where it can be an issue is if your opponent's bishop is fianchettoed on that same diagonal. So you always have to watch out for those types of tactics. And one thing I'll say, always complete the fiend keto. So let's say you're black and you play B6. You want to move bishop to the B7, bishop B7 as soon as possible. You don't want to move that B pawn to B6 and then you kind of do something else and get distracted because that diagonal is going to be open and your rook's going to be undefended. So always complete a fiend keto as soon as possible. That's a Bruce Pandolfini thing. I remember reading something. He spoke about that. Always complete the fiend keto because tactics on that diagonal can be very, very nasty. Next thing has to do with a kingside pawn storm. Depending on the position, your opponent will decide to push his kingside pawns and attack your castled king. Now, sometimes that's correct, but sometimes amateur players do it just because they feel like doing it. And what you have to keep in mind, don't panic or react impulsively when your opponent does that. Just because they start moving their pawns towards your king, don't freak out, because what some players do, they don't realize that they can either ignore it or attack in the center, and then what they do instead is they make some incorrect or impulsive defensive move. Like your opponent will move his kingside pawns, and then you feel you need to do the same. But if you stop and look at the position, you might realize that you can counterattack in the center or another part of the board, or you can try to prove that your opponent moving his kingside pawns is a mistake. Now, one specific example, let's say you have the black pieces. Let's say you have your knight on F6, which is like a typical developing move. You might freak out if your opponent who has the white pieces is going to push his G pawn to attack your pawn on F6, like because you're going to have to move it and you might have to move it to the back rank and you're going to freak out that you have a worse position. But here's the thing. When your knight on F6 is attacked with a pawn, it's often fine if the knight has to go back to the first rank temporarily. It may seem like a sort of a passive or a losing defensive move where you're moving your knight back to the first rank, but not at all. And his advanced G pawn may not be an issue. And remember, that's temporary. You're moving the knight back. And when your knight goes back on the first rank, it could end up having a strong defensive posture there. But if not, you can reposition it somewhere else. So don't necessarily worry. Again, using that as an example, if your knight on F6 is attacked and you have to move it back to the first rank, that's not a losing thing. It might feel losing because nobody likes retreating moves, but don't necessarily freak out about that. I've had a number of games where that's happened, where I moved my knight back to the first rank because it was attacked by the G pawn, but my position is fine. And with experience, you'll understand, when to not panic in those positions and that it's not as bad as it looks. Next takeaway from this game is always play to your strengths, even if it's not the quote unquote best move. Because very often we say, okay, I'm going to play this move because this is probably the best move, but I'm not really comfortable with the ensuing position, but I'm going to play it because it's quote unquote the best move. Or you could play a move that might be second or third best, but it plays to your strengths because maybe it trades queens, or maybe it involves a position that's closed and you're good with closed positions, even though that might not be quote unquote the best move, but you know what to do and you're going to do well. So for example, in this game, even though it wasn't quote unquote the best move, I induced a queen trade because I enjoy queenless middle games and tend to do very well with them. A lot of people do. I am Jay Bonin, the Iron Man. He was on this podcast. He likes queenless middle games. And that's what I did in this game. It technically wasn't the best move if you put it in the engine, but when I forced the queen trade, I ended up with a position that I was very comfortable with, that I was confident with. And even if it maybe takes me a little bit longer to win, or even if the position's equal, I'm comfortable and confident, and that's important. You want to be in a situation where you feel like you're in control of the game, where you understand what's happening. And I happen to enjoy queenless middle games. So I sort of engineered the game into that specific situation because that's what I'm comfortable with. Other players don't like to trade queens, but that can also be a mistake because, it really depends on the position. But I chose the queenless middle game, even though maybe ideally it wasn't the best idea, because I was comfortable with that and I was able to handle and understand the position in front of me. And that's very, very important. Try to steer the game into one that you enjoy playing, right? Play to your strengths. Next takeaway from this game and I've mentioned this before, is a major reality of this game is that at least one pair of rooks, and very often both rooks, will end up being exchanged on an open file. Now, why do I mention that? That might seem like, okay, it's like, so what? Why are you even saying that? Because we like to use rooks, they're heavy pieces, and when we move a rook on a file to go to control it, we get frustrated when our opponent puts his own rook there to contest it, but you have to expect that. And some people might be like, well, I don't want to put my rook on the open file because we're just going to trade down. But guess what? If you don't do that, he's going to get the jump on you. Where you want to look for an advantage, what you're hoping for is that you put a rook on an open file and he can't put a rook on the file because let's say his rooks aren't connected yet. All right. And then you can double up and get the jump on your opponent. That's why the old expression you may have heard, rooks connected means protected. So what some players do, they don't develop properly. Let's say one of their knights isn't developed. There's a knight between their two rooks. And so he can't move his rook there because you could simply take it. So again, it's kind of corny, but it's true. Rooks connected means protected. Now let's talk about endgames a bit, which was a major theme in this game. First thing I want to talk about are minor piece endings, say where you have a knight and your opponent has a bishop or vice versa. And that's what happened in this game. And when it's minor piece versus minor piece with pawns, you have to analyze those trades very thoroughly because that decision could be decisive. In other words, if you want to trade your minor piece for your opponent's minor piece, really look that through because you don't just want to say, oh, it's an equal trade. You really have to look at the pawn structure and the king position when those trades are over. Now, it could be drawn. It could very well be that you trade pieces and it's drawn. But also, it's very often true that when you make a trade, it can be decisive for one side or the other. And I've had many games where I've won because of bad trades, and I've also had games that I've lost because I didn't see it through. Either I didn't analyze well enough or I was in time pressure. But when you trade down into a king and pawn endgame, it doesn't just have to even be minor piece endings. It could be rook endings. When you trade down all the pieces so that it's just king and pawns, you have to look at those trades. You have to analyze that very, very thoroughly. Because if it's decisive, if one side is going to be clearly winning and one side clearly losing from that trade, you got to watch for that because you don't want to be on the losing side of that. So don't be impulsive with those trades. And with endgames in general, remember the rules, sort of what you want to keep in mind for endgames. You want an active king, active pieces, active pawns, and obviously you want to try to get one or more passed pawns because that's what's going to win it for you. So let's kind of go through those. So active king. The king becomes a major weapon in the endgame, and a common problem is that players don't activate their king enough. They just kind of keep shuffling their rooks or minor pieces of pawns, and they just keep their king in the corner or wherever it was when it castled, and it doesn't move from there. You need to get your king active. The king protects pawns. It controls squares, things like that. We're now going to take one more short break, and then we're going to talk a bit about grinding out endgame wins in those very, very even positions. That's coming up. All right, so we're talking about endgames here. I want to mention a book that I did a dedicated episode on. It's called The Survival Guide to Competitive Chess, and it's written by Grandmaster John Ems. It is absolutely fantastic. I'm going to throw a link in the show description for both this book and for the episode that I did with John Ems. We spoke about this book in detail. And this book really is about the psychological side of chess, like why we don't play at a level that's comparable with our rating, or we don't make the most of our talent. And again, it's really about chess psychology and why we lose games we shouldn't. This is from the back cover of this book, The Survival Guide to Competitive Chess. Are you making the most of your chess talent? Do you always perform to the best of your ability? Do your results match up with your understanding of the game? If the answer to any of these questions is no, then read on. In The Survival Guide to Competitive Chess, Grandmaster and experienced tournament player John Ems reveals the secrets of how to maximize your potential and improve your results, drawing upon his own over-the-board experiences EMS tackles the all-important aspects of practical play, concentration and behavior at the chessboard, playing for a win or a draw, winning good positions and saving difficult ones, handling time trouble, avoiding silly mistakes, understanding your strengths and weaknesses, building and opening repertoire, using chess computers and software, preparing for opponents, understanding and utilizing the finer points of the rules, and much more besides. Read this book and play every game with the confidence that you really can give it your best shot. And then there's 3 bullet points: a comprehensive guide to practical play, ideal for ambitious players, written by a battle-hardened expert. It really is fantastic. Chapter 1 is called In the Heat of Battle, and some of the subchapters include avoiding high-risk, low-reward tactics, the lucky oversight, bluffing, the poker face, know the rules. And in Chapter 2, which is winning, drawing, and losing, he has getting a result, last round nerves, converting winning positions, and then a section I want to talk about now, which is grinding out endgame wins. Because this is a skill that you absolutely must have if you want to win tournament games, where you grind out wins in those even or those quote-unquote technically boring positions. And I'm now going to read from page 79 of the book. And I'm going to read a few paragraphs because it's very, very well said. Here's what he says. This is a quote. "It doesn't matter what style of chess you play or which openings you employ. You may play as aggressively as Tal or Shirov, but on occasions you'll still end up with quote-unquote boring technical positions. Sometimes they simply cannot be avoided, especially if your opponent is white and chooses to play in a certain way. If you are looking to beat a lower-rated opponent from a quiet position, patience is important. You have to be prepared for the long haul. One thing that's worth remembering and repeating to yourself during a game is that a lower-rated player may match your standard of play for many moves or may even outplay you, but the odds are at some point a mistake will come, even if it is 20 or 30 moves down the line, and then you must be ready to pounce. Also, I don't think you need to fear going into endgames, which you suspect with best play should end up as a draw. This is simply because best play is one thing that can never be counted upon. Furthermore, when you study endgames, you soon realize that in many positions, there is a lot more going on than you would first imagine, and still plenty of scope to outplay your opponent. The following game qualifies as a typical endgame grind." And he has an instructive game. I think that's very well said. Now, I would add this. It says, if you are looking to beat a lower-rated opponent from a quiet position, patience is important. I don't even think it matters what your opponent's rating is. If they're lower-rated, equal-rated, or higher-rated, patience is always going to be important from a quiet position. And I agree that you have to be prepared for the long haul. It really is a game of chicken. You can't be impatient. You need to wait them out, and you can't force things. You can't try too hard to win. You really need to wait them out. Now, if they truly don't make a mistake, you may have to shake hands and split the point. But you'd be surprised how, by just being stubborn, they will become impatient. Your opponent will become impatient. Let them be the one to become impatient. They make a mistake, and then you win. So essentially what this means in practical terms, when you have one of those dead-drawn endgame positions, you need to induce a mistake or just wear your opponent out until he makes one. Now, for me, those positions are actually incredibly frustrating. I mean, I like endgames, I really do, and I like those positions where you have to grind out a win, but at the same time, it can be extremely frustrating when it's a game that you really want the win. I mean, we always really want the win, but there are some games where for whatever reason, it could have something to do with your opponent, or maybe the rating points you're going to get, or maybe you're placed in a tournament where you really want the win, but it's just a very dry position. And it's kind of a double-edged sword because I like going into end games because I'm confident in my end game skill. But one of the problems is that if it really is a dry, even position, your opponent can hold his own for a while, even if he's not the strongest end game player, because it's so hard to make a move where you get an advantage. So what happened in my game, as you'll see, if you look at the PGN, we end up in this dead-drawn position. I mean, the engine at several points was even saying like 0.00. I just kept sort of shuffling, kept being patient. And what happened was, after a while, he eventually dropped the ball. He moved his king that was protecting a pawn, and I was able to take it with my knight, and then he fell apart. Now, it's interesting. This was the kind of position where my knight was attacking the pawn. His king was protecting that pawn, but his king and my knight hadn't moved for a while. They were stationary for a while. And I guess it's a psychological thing. You forget, because he didn't move his king for so long, there's some sort of mental block that happens. It's an oversight where he, I guess, forgot that his king was defending a pawn, that he couldn't move it. And when he moved his king away from the pawn and I took it with my knight, it was probably like, oh, I forgot his knight was attacking it and my king was defending it. But that's kind of a psychological thing when neither piece moved for a while. And once I won that pawn with my knight, he kind of fell apart from there. But even though you'll look, I actually misplayed a bit after that, but I still held the win. He offered a draw more than once, which was a completely legitimate draw offer because the position was even. And I was debating taking it. And another night, maybe I would have, but I don't know. I was somehow feeling it. I really wanted the win as well. And I hung in there. Now, if he played correctly and was stubborn, we probably would have ended up with a draw. But lucky for me, he made this mistake. And that's how you grind out these wins in these even positions. You just sort of shuffle, keep everything tight, make sure everything is protected. Don't overpress. Very important. Don't overpress. And you just hope that they will overpress or blunder or miss something, which is what happened. And I just want to end with one more thing. Maybe this is a little bit of a rabbit hole, but that's okay. I sometimes question the chess.com game review because I put this game through the review and it said my percentage was 94.9 and my opponent's was 91.4, which seems awfully high. I mean, I think the rating it gave me was like 2,200 based on this one game, which I'm definitely not. But I find this a lot, especially with my OTB games, where I'm getting an accuracy percentage over 90% and an estimated rating of well over 2,000. But that's not the case. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I sometimes wonder if this game review is sort of too generous or overblown, because I certainly didn't feel like it warranted that percentage. I don't know, maybe I'm selling myself short, but I find that quite often with my over the board games where I don't think it's quite as good as the game review says it is, but that's what it said. It was interesting. But anyway, if you do look at the game, you'll kind of see some interesting nuances with it. But at any rate, I wanted to share that game and those takeaways. The Survival Guide to Competitive Chess by John Ems. Definitely check out the book. I highly recommend it. It's extremely underrated. This is one of those books that's sort of a hidden gem. I'm amazed it's not more popular than it is. I mean, it doesn't seem to be as popular as I feel it should be, but it really is a modern classic because it's one of those books that, again, deals with the practical aspect, winning in the most practical way possible. It's almost similar to something like Chess for Tigers, which you know is a big favorite of mine. But anyway, I do recommend it very highly. Really appreciate you listening. And as always, I hope you win your next game. Have a great day, everybody.